All right, well, I have 4 p.m., so I'm going to get the program started. Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's informative presentation and lecture on ethical issues in bidding, presented today by the Dean of the College of Engineering, Dean Mike Toole. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Paul Smith. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at the University of Toledo and the University of Toledo Alumni Association. I also work as a liaison to the College of Engineering Alumni Affiliate, a sponsor of today's program. As guests are joining us, I would like to share a few quick housekeeping notes about our virtual event. Attendee names are not visible to other attendees, so you can only really see your name in the attendee window. Therefore, if you are curious how many other attendees are there, we are expecting lots and lots of attendees, over 100. Due to the fact that we are expecting over 100 attendees and a desire to preserve the bandwidth for optimal viewing, we will not be utilizing voice or video communications with our presenter today. If you wish to submit a question for Dean Toole, you should do that using the Q&A box, which is located in the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions, those go in the Q&A box. For times that Dean Toole may ask a question of you, the audience, an open-ended question during the presentation, you can respond to those questions using the chat box. So if you're looking at your screen, the bottom right-hand corner, you should see a Q&A icon as well as a chat icon. That is where you can respond to those as well. We'll be monitoring those as the program goes on. Additionally, if you'd like to change your view, you can click the upper right-hand corner of your screen to expand or reduce the screen. Today's program does fulfill one of the 2 required hours, so it requires one of the 2 required hours of ethics professional development credit for Ohio professional engineers. Certificates will be issued via email, the email that you use at registration after the program. Hopefully within the next few business days, our goal is to get those out prior to the Thanksgiving holiday. To obtain credit, your certificate must be online. In order to obtain credit, you must be online during the duration of the program. That's how we're tracking who attended. The WebEx system actually tracks how long you watch the program, so just make sure you're there and watching during the duration of the program. If for some reason you do have to log off prior to the end of the program or prior to the duration of the program, feel free to contact us and we'll see if there's anything we can do to get that worked out. Lastly, due to the COVID pandemic and the professional challenges posed to engineers everywhere, especially our alumni, friends, and family, we're offering this professional development program free of charge to all attendees. If you would like to make a small financial contribution as a way of saying thank you for this program here today, additional information about some possible funds, especially the College of Engineering Alumni Affiliate Student Scholarship Fund, as well as the Engineering Progress Fund, will be included in your post-event email. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Mike Toole has served as the Dean of the College of Engineering at the University of Toledo since 2017. His previous professional experiences include serving as a company commander in the U.S. Navy SEABEE, that's SEABEE battalion, construction battalion, constructing infrastructure overseas. He also fitted out hundreds of infrastructure, commercial and residential projects and negotiated hundreds of change orders. Serving as an expert, he's also served as an expert witness in multidisciplinary engineering firms, and of course is also a teacher of civil and environmental engineering students and construction engineering, project management, and engineering ethics. Dr. Toole is a professional engineer and a fellow in the American Society of Civil Engineers. Please give a warm but virtual welcome to Dean Mike Toole.
Thank you, Paul. Let me look over to you. Can you hear me all right, Paul? All right, very good. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I appreciate it. I have to say, when Paul first asked me in the Alumni Affiliates, which is the Engineering Alumni Affiliates, wonderful group of people, we get together routinely, and I thought it was going to be them. So I was looking forward to connecting with them with kind of an intimate setting, virtual, but so I knew I was going to be able to, hit some tough questions. I could send it to Lori Adams and that sort of thing. And then I started looking at other people and I thought, well, all right, Ken Lovejoy, I can pick on him, and Bill Kester and Craig Bowie, they'll be up for some tough questions. And then it grew, which is wonderful. And so whether you're getting your CPD or you're just out for a fun afternoon, thanks for joining. I appreciate that. Let me tell you what you're not going to get today, though. You're not going to get some brilliant sage advice from some ethics guru. Sorry, that's not me. I've given lots of lectures of ethics over the years for a lot of different contexts, This is the first one on bidding. But as we're going to realize that there's some gray areas. And so really what I'm going to try and do for you is just give you the tools and the processes for digging deep. So in some ways, really, what I'm going to do is I'll do a quick flyover of the NSPE code. And by the way, let me just stop and mention, Paul should have, or somebody should have emailed you 3 documents. The first was a list of ethical issues that I'll be talking about today, and so hopefully get your input via the chat function. The other one was the NSPE Code of Ethics in a kind of compact mode, too small for old eyes to see. And so I blow it up into a larger font, and that included as well. So if you don't have that now and you want to get that, go ahead and look at Paul's email, because he should have gotten that from him. Or you might, if you could also, in a private chat, so you can, in the chat function, instead of sending to everyone, you could just type in your personal email, and then Paul will email to you right now. It's not essential. You're still going to get credit. But if you wanted to get these documents and you had forgotten to, pull them up or never registered to get those, that's no problem. So anyway, what I'm going to do today is, it's kind of the idea of, rather than giving you a fish, I'm going to teach you how to fish, right? So you're not going to get these totally brilliant, unambiguous answers, because too many things, especially with bidding, still have some ambiguity in it. But what I'm going to do is give you we're going to quick, kind of one hand, other hand type things, recognizing that the Code of Ethics sometimes takes some hard work to dig into. And we'll talk more about that as well. I'm going to be focused on the NSPE, National Society of Professional Engineers. I happen to be a civil engineer. I got to tell you, I prefer the Civil Engineer Code of Ethics more than the NSPE, and especially they just revised it just recently, last couple of months, and it's even simpler now. So ASC's got a good one, but we're going to deep dive into the NSPE a little bit. So let me share my own perspectives. Why does Ohio and other states require ethics training every 2 years? Why do we have codes of ethics for the last 50 or 100 years? And my own perspective is this. I think that engineers have special powers, right? We've gone to school for many years. We wear the Order of the Engineer ring. Many of us do. We have abilities to see things that protect life and safety that other people don't have. So with those special powers come special responsibilities. So you heard that when you graduated from maybe your bachelor's or master's or whatever. The other thing is, the fact is, we all have self-interests. I think that federal election, this recent election, has taught us we all have self-interest very much. Anyway, and so in any kind of society, and in especially a context, many of us are working for-profit firms, right? Our employers want us to make as much money as possible on every single project. Our clients want us to finish on time and have a lower cost. So we've got self-interests. Our employers, our clients have self-interests. And so really what the Code of Engineers is doing is trying to balance those. Our own desire, understandable, to pursue our own self-interest, to advance in our organization, to get more money or bonuses, with our employers' self-interest, and again, clients, against that of the needs of society. And that's what really all engineering code of ethics talk about, that balance. They may not use the words I just did, but that's what it is. So this is something you can't see because it's too small. This is the NSPE Code of Engineers. This is one of the documents I sent you, and I've studied it very carefully until I realized print it out in bigger font. Here's the back side of it. So I'm going to do a flyover of this, but I wanted to let you know this is what it looks like. If you didn't get the version, you didn't get any of the documents, and you want to have this code, right now you can just Google NSPE, National Society of Professional Engineers Code of Ethics. You'll get straight to this page, you'll see download it, and then you'll have it in front of you. Again, apologize for the small font, but here is the Code of Ethics. And so if you take a look at it, up in the left-hand corner, you'll see right below the big blue bar is preamble. And then you see right below that, the paragraph is 1 fundamental canons. And I'll blow these up a little bit to look at it. And then we go into the rules of practice. And then if we go to the right side of this page, we got our professional obligations. So it seems kind of complicated, and it is, but we'll unpack it today. And on the back side, we've got more professional obligations and then some kind of footnotes, and we'll talk about one of those a little bit. So I said it starts with the preamble, then again, the fundamental canons, and there's 6. By the way, ASC has 8, or at least the older version had 8. Then there's the rules of practice. And with the way NSPE does it is the fundamental rules of practice are deep dives into the first 5 fundamental canons. And then we go into this professional obligations, and it does a deep dive into canon number 6. Then it kind of goes back to canons number 1 through 5 and gives you some more context and more thoughts on it. So that's the overview. That's the flyover that I told you. I want to show you this preamble though. So see, it's not that long. And by the way, this is in black font because I actually copied it as a JPEG file into it. But every other rest of this session, when you see red font, you know that's straight from the NSPE Code of Ethics. But in this case, it's straight from it. It's the preamble. So if you look at that quickly, and I hope every time I'm talking, you're reading the slide a little bit because I don't want to sit there and read every word. But you look, it's pretty high-end stuff, pretty lofty, right? Highest standards of honesty, integrity, honesty, fairness, and equity, highest principles. So it's not a low bar, it's the high bar. And that's the preamble just to kind of get you warmed up, thinking about, okay, when we start talking about balancing self-interest and our societal needs and what we should do for that, you got to go for the high bar. So that's kind of what we'll be talking about today. I hope you agree that we're talking about the high bar, although you'll hear a little bit about my own experiences and maybe you'll think otherwise. So then here's the fundamental canon, 6 of them, as I mentioned. Some of them look very familiar, right? We all know hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. By the way, the new ASC code changed the wording just a little bit on that, but paramount, right? It's a shall also, very, very important. And then if you go down below, some things again sound familiar. Perform services only in their area of competence. Issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. Act for each employer and client as faithful agents or trustees. Avoid deceptive acts that might be sounds very relevant to bidding and negotiating. And then last one is conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully, so to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. Kind of sounds like going back to the preamble a little bit. So there's the 6 canons. We'll be looking at some or just about all of these today at one time or another as we explore those specific scenarios that hopefully you received ahead of time. So as I mentioned, rules of practice is the idea of it's the canons 1 through 5, and here's a picture of the deep dive that I told you. So if you see in the upper left corner, engineers shall hold paramount safety, health, and welfare of the canon. That's fundamental canon 1. And now you start going below it. So go ahead and read some of that stuff because, it's interesting when we start thinking about what we assume the details are going to talk about based on the wording in the canon itself. Sometimes it's getting into some things like, oh, I hadn't thought how that applies. But in this case, I don't think it's too hard. For example, if we're worried about safety and health of the public, then if our judgment is overruled, because we're an engineer, we're supposed to do something about it, right? Tell our employer or client that, hey, we got problems here that may jeopardize safety and health. Number 2 there, or B, I should say, engineers shall approve only those engineering documents that are in conformity with applicable standards. And the answer, if you think about it, well, of course, if we have standards to safeguard health and safety, and so therefore, if we are doing a design or any kind of document that's going out on the street could lead to those standards being violated, well, then we're probably going to have problems with safety and health. So as you go back down here, you can see all the different ways, the kind of nuances, the details, the specific situations that may get people's attention and say, aha, that's why it's under engineers shall hold paramount. Number 2, you see engineers shall perform service. I'm not going to go through all these one by one. I'm going to pop them up on the screen later, but I want you to recognize how, again, the rules of practice is, the deep dives into the first 5 canons. And then, as I mentioned earlier, on the right hand of the first page, that professional obligations deep dive into canon 6. And then we start kind of going round and round a little bit of repetition, a little bit of nuances and new context. So that's the flyover, just to tell you. So sometime today, I'm going to pop up a scenario and I'll say, here's the fundamental canon that I think applies. And then I'll pop up a rules of practice that might apply. And they'll say, but this fundamental obligation may not apply, or seem to say the different things. So hopefully we'll have a little fun. And again, I want you to use the chat. Now, the problem is when I'm projecting this and looking very intently at the camera and I see the screen, I can't see your chats. And so don't be offended if Burdell Jackson says something really brilliant in a chat, and Burdell, I don't know it, so I can't call you out it and commend it, okay? So those are the things there. And so Peter has the same thing. Just make sure you send me an email afterwards, and I'll know the brilliant thing you said. So anyhow, that's what we're going to do today. So let's start with this one. When can an engineer not follow the code of ethics? And let's do a purely hypothetical situation. Oh, let me just go back. Paul, I'm counting on you to monitor the chats or the Q&A and interrupt me if something you think is timely. Otherwise, we'll get to them all at the end, certainly. But if there's something I'm either not understanding or they don't hear me as well, let me know. Does that sound good, Paul? Okay. All right. So question is, when can an engineer not follow a code of ethics? So very quickly, my career, some of you know this already, I went a civil engineering degree at Bucknell University. I joined the Navy, officer in the Civil Engineer Corps, as Paul mentioned. And while in the Navy, I was a contracting officer, which meant I got certified, trained and certified to be an expert really in this kind of contract law and contract administration. Then I went to grad school at MIT, and then I went to do a startup in Chicago. That didn't go forward. That's a long story I'll tell you over a glass of something. And had to get a job quickly, and I got it with a home builder, a national home builder in Chicago. So we built about 400 homes. So I am an engineer. I'm a PE at that point, registered in multiple states. I have my Ph.D., but who cares about that? And yet I'm not working for an engineering organization. The home builder, we would hire architects. They're the ones who stamp the plans. Sometimes we have it in our house, but I was doing construction services. I was doing bidding and negotiating. So I wasn't really doing engineering. I never made a decision that would somehow jeopardize health and safety, other than I required some carpenters to be out there when it was 9 degrees. But other than that, and so how does that absolve me from it? Or, the fact is that I was, maybe working, even if I was working for an engineering company, but let's say I'm the CFO, or I'm marketing, or I'm HR. So does that make it you don't have to follow it or not? So that's the first ethical question. And I'll be honest, when I was a younger person doing that, still in my early 30s, I kind of thought I wasn't looking at the code of ethics for guidance on how I did my job bidding and negotiating. So let's look at the fundamental canons. That's always a good one. So we think about, right, engineers and fulfillment of their duties. And if you look at some of those things, and again, the issue of, all right, do I have to follow it? Well, I think the answer is this. Yeah, I really do, because is it possible in some cases I could influence some of these? So I told you right off, I never had a position to influence really safety, health, and welfare of the public. That was other people in the organization, and mostly the design professionals who we hired. But if you look at some of those other things, maybe they do apply a little bit. And particularly, you might say, bidding, negotiation, let's talk about Canon 5, avoid deceptive acts, and Canon 6 about honorably, responsibly, honor, reputation, etc. Well, let's look at number 5. And here's where the weird thing is. I'm sorry, actually, let's look at also the Code of Professional Obligations, because I'm going to show you later the deceptive acts doesn't help as much. But if we jump now from the canons to the end, the professional obligations, you'll look there. Professional obligation 8. Engineers shall accept personal responsibility for their professional activities. Okay. It didn't say, by the way, I'm going to go back up to here. In the canons, engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties. There is no set about when they're acting like a design professional or when they're making decisions that could affect life and safety. It just says engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties. So I think that's important. So I think I had something to learn at the time. And if I looked at the time at professional obligation 8, and I look particularly at this idea of B, engineers shall not use association with a non-engineer, a corporation, or partnership as a cloak for unethical acts. So in other words, my identity as working in a home builder, a construction company that was both development and construction, that's a cloak, right? So I should have been. I was falling under the code of ethics, even though I wasn't consulting it, wasn't thinking about it. And so maybe some of you, I'm curious, have you ever been that same thing and also considered those questions, questioned yourself, does the code of ethics apply to me in this situation or in this company? And if you want to throw some things in chat, I promise you we won't give this to the press, but this will be really interesting for me to look at it later. And if we have time in Q&A, which I hope to, I'll scan through that and maybe we'll bring that out for discussion. Again, I really wish you could unmic and talk to us, unmute, but with too many people, we can't do that. So that's how I looked at it. And, here's another thing. Remember how I said at the very end of the document, it also had this other couple footnotes, and this is one of them. This idea of, does it apply to me as an engineer or to my company? And I think this text, if you read it here, it makes it very clear, both, right? It applies to the engineer providing professional services, but it also very much flows up through the organizational structure. So, although you who started, Bill Kester, you had all those, your own firms, very successful. It flowed from your individual engineers right up to the top. And of course, you knew that and acted it. But that's how important to remind ourselves. We can't be thinking that the organization is going to cover things up a little bit. That's not the way it works. Okay, so let's get into some more dives. And I'm hoping I don't know how many chats we've had so far, but I'm hoping some of you will do this. And that chat, maybe you could put in there is, has this ever happened to you? Has anybody ever done this to you? In other words, somebody's bidding out something and they did this to you. And what you did, hypothetically, some current dean in a former job, just pure hypothetical, used to, again, let me say first how I did it. When I first could take the bids, I wouldn't have a sealed bid opening in public or anything, but I would take it, open the envelope, write it down, low bidder, got it. Well, I very quickly got called into my boss's office, the division president, and said, why are your numbers up? You're higher than your predecessor. I'm like, well, I'm getting the bids. I'm very clear in my request for bids. And he's like, you're just taking those bids? And I'm like, yeah, what do you mean they're bids? And he said, no, that's not how you do it. And he would say, Mike, you got to put the screw on them. And literally did that, put the screw on them. So here's what he taught me and others people taught me in the Chicagoland area. So you would get bids from 3 to 5 bidders. There was lots of people looking to bid. I never had to hustle because my employer was very large, building a fair number of homes and growing across the country and in Chicago. So I got lots of people asking to give bids. Now I got to tell you, I was a union subcontractor or union contractor. I had to hire union because that was Chicago. So that limited the bid list a little bit. Not so much for vendors, but every time I would have a new subdivision and I would have about 10 going at once, and there'd be like 6 different models. So I would call up the carpenter and say, give me bid for these 6 models and the concrete contractor and the site work contractor and the drywall contractor and the window vendor. And so you would have, believe it or not, 41 of these different contracts for each house, for each subdivision. So, I had to juggle and be pretty efficient. So I would get 3 to 5 bids for each of those trades or material contracts, and I would get those in, and I'd toss the 2 or 3 high ones, too high, or people I didn't like or whatever. And then if they were high, then I would immediately call up the 3, and I'd say, you insulted me. You told me you wanted some work from me, and you gave terrible bids. What are you doing to me? I'm never going to let you bid again. And so then they'd say, oh, so sorry. I'm going to give you a new bid. Let me sharpen my pencil. I'll get you a new bid. I would take the new bids. Then I'd sometimes work them a second round, or sometimes I would work the last 2. And I'll say, you're not there. You're not quite there. They'd say, am I the low bidder? I'd say, you're not where you need to be, right? So I didn't quite lie, but I didn't fully truthful. And that's the third bullet. So it wasn't fully volunteering information. And I was not, some people could say, you were not honest with me. You didn't tell me I was already the low bidder. And so I agree, I was not fully honest. So I'm pleading guilty here a little bit here. I don't feel good about this. I'm glad now that I focus on ethics. But at the time, I thought I was doing my job. And you know what? The division president thought I was doing my job as well. So the question is, how can you judge me? What codes of ethics can you use to say this hypothetical person doing this was a unethical engineer? So we can look at the preamble, right? That's what we talked about, very much the high bar. And you could say, Mike, there wasn't honesty. There wasn't impartiality, really, fairness and equity. There was no highest principle. So you could judge that behavior that we discussed that way. Or we could look at the fundamental canons. And again, that's where you look at number 5, maybe, that deceptive acts, and say, Mike, everything about your negotiations and even that bidding process was deceptive. And so my question to you is, I would suggest every time you're trying to get a low price, every time you negotiate, whether it's a car or whatever, I would suggest to you that full information is not usually the best way to do it. But people may disagree with me. And so I remember as part of my training with this home builder, I went to Karis negotiating. And their slogan, if you might know, is you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And so they taught me this whole idea of, never leave money on the table, never offer to split, a whole bunch of principles that I don't get to use anymore because I'm an up and up person these days and I really don't negotiate other than maybe a car. Anyway, this was the things that I guess I would have looked at. But if I say, well, deceptive acts, now let's take a look at it. And this is the point here is, go ahead and read that while I'm talking. The point here is sometimes the heading doesn't go where you want it to go in the details. And so here you see the deception. that they're talking about is all about falsifying qualifications or giving some kind of misleading about your own qualifications or your past experiences. There's nothing about bidding or negotiating here. And in fact, I would suggest to you, I did look through it. There's nothing that I ever saw about bidding. So if the idea you want to judge me because you're saying, Mike, a bid is a bid. A bid is not a starting point to negotiate. Well, I would suggest to you it's not in the code of ethics, okay? Maybe it should be. And you might say custom and practice says it's a code, a bid is a bid. And I would suggest to you there's a whole bunch of custom and practice like me who didn't treat it that way. And of course, even contract law, there's nothing says you can't do that with bidding. And so, this is not. I'm less able to judge myself, even though I know I didn't sleep real well. By the way, I didn't stay with that firm very long for that reason, because of the posturing and the kind of deception, even though I was doing pretty well. So, let's go back a little bit further and ask this question. Is it ethical to withhold facts, all right, or speak ambiguously, which is how I would say I would do it? And if you look at Fundamental Obligation 4, it says engineers shall not disclose without consent confidential information concerning the business affairs or technical processes of any present or former client or employer or public body on which they serve. This is what I would have pointed at the time, because if you say, without saying, yes, you're allowed to hold information confidential, hold it close to your chest. Otherwise, somebody like Jim Schnabel could walk in there and say, hey, Mike, I know you're an ethical engineer, and you need to tell me right now how much is the maximum amount that UToledo is going to pay me. Don't tell me how much you want it to be. You have to tell me ethically what's the maximum you're allowed to pay me or going to pay me, right? In other words, revealing my whole negotiating posture. And so, fortunately, I think I can use this document to say, no, I actually am trying to be a faithful agent for my employer or my client, and I don't have to disclose all information. So that's how I went through this a little bit, and you may disagree and you might say he's dancing, but I can tell you the code of ethics, sometimes there's room to dance and time to have discussion. And again, if it was a smaller, we would have a little chance to have a discussion. But let me keep going here. And again, I'm hoping the chats are coming through, and maybe Paul will interrupt or something. But next question is, who should be allowed to bid? Again, this is from my hypothetical experience. And this idea, all right, but in this case, it's not I wasn't a civil engineer. Most of these, by the way, because we're engineers, I'm assuming you're a design firm, a consulting firm like DGL or somebody like that, and you're now have a developer client. This is not from Laurie Adams or Jim, anybody. I could tell you, I promise right now, Rich McGuckin, this is not from them. I made it up. I don't want to get them in trouble. I totally made it up, but I'm saying it's that kind of consulting firm. Okay. So I am looking at my text to make sure Laurie's not texting me right now and telling me cease and desist. Anyway, so we've got a developer client ask you to prepare site civil documents for a new office building, and you're going to be doing site services, right? So you got to negotiate as far as, are they complying with the intent of the documents, plans, and specs? Are they, the qualities there are verifying progress payments. That's what the clients count on you do. And you hear that some bidder is going to be somebody that, I guess in a rather blunt way, kind of a dirtbag. You've had problems, run-ins before all the time. I can tell you I experienced this with my former home builder employer and as a contracting officer in the Navy, as a civilian at the time after my SEABEE tour. And so there are contractors that are just trouble from day one. And so what could you do? What can you say to the client about this bad person, this bad egg? So we might say, well, look at, and I apologize if the font got small, but I'm putting some stuff in there. Look at Rule of Practice 4. So, right, engineers shall disclose all known conflicts or potential conflicts of interest that could influence my judgment. So I don't think I have a conflict of interest. There's no money that could change hands. But you know what? The fact is, I know I have information that does influence my judgment, and I know that I'm going to want to try and keep this person off if possible. So I think there's a conflict issue there, that an ethical issue is I should realize that and not go further. Paul, anything to say?
Yeah, we did have a question come in, and the question was, what do we do if we have clients that ask us to provide a list of acceptable contractors?
Yeah, so really this is it. This is the exact same. Thank you. Perfect question. So one could say, first of all, the client asked you for it, right? So that's a great one. And I'm going to come up with the other one. So first of all, just recognize you might be biased, and you have to think about whether that diminishes your honesty and integrity. But how about this? So engineers shall advise their clients or employers when they believe a project will be not successful. right? So when a client asks for a list of bidders, you say, really, let's not include this firm because there could be trouble. You don't want that on, there's going to be change orders. They're going to finish late. They might have a safety violation and shut down the site. So, that you can justify that. On the other hand, look at professional obligation 1F. So it's the same professional obligation 1, right? Engineers shall be guided in all the relations by the highest standards. But now it says engineers shall treat all persons with dignity, respect, fairness, and without discrimination. So in my mind, it seems to me the fair thing would be to let everybody bid, right? On the other hand, you can't get 18 or 20 bids. That would be a pain. You've got to get responsive bids, as you all know. You've got to be able to do that apples to apples comparison. And so I think we can go back to this middle one there, and that is representing our clients, and we want to have a good bid list, and it fits with the client's bidding procedures. So we haven't violated that. It's not bidding any laws unless you did some kind of pattern of discrimination based on race or gender or something like that. But other than that, I think this is done. I still think we have to worry about 1F a little bit. But this is an example of where I told you, I wanted Mike to give me a crisp, clear answer, unequivocal. And I can't because that's not how life is. But the codes of ethics help us to weigh some of those things. So is your firm qualified for this project? So you've been doing civil engineering consulting, and you've been successful bidding out some site works and roads, horizontal work, et cetera. And also the client says, I like you, you're great, you get things done. Hey, I got a new chemical plant or module that's going in here. It's coming in, it's been pre-designed by a German firm. It's coming, you just need to, hire out the prime contractor, let them do the subs or whatever, but you are going to manage the data oversight as far as, again, progress payments. Maybe there's change orders, requests for information, all those things. Should you accept the project? So I'm wondering if anybody's brave enough to put an answer in the chat right now. Yes, you'll be able to see it, unless you do privately to Paul. But I'm more curious, people think, hey, this is not a problem at all. Or some people say, well, so Paul, any answers, any chats coming in, or are people they're just a little more passive today?
We have a no so far.
Okay.
And that's about it.
All right. Well, it's because I guess.
Which is par for the course for probably a 4 p.m. class.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I still want to encourage them to, and they can always tell me later about how I was wrong. So I also agree with a no. So if you look at that rule of practice 2A, perform services only in the area of their competence, right? So 2, that's the fundamental canon, and we should only take assignments when qualified by education or experience in the specific technical fields involved. Now, on the other hand, I got registered first in California, and I think that was a civil engineer. But I remember in Illinois, it was just professional engineer, or maybe it was Massachusetts. I think it was Illinois. And it didn't say what kind of engineer that you're registered. So in theory, it's up to people to decide. So some people could say, hey, it's just construction services, construction project, I can take this. It seems that we go a little deeper dive, right? And first of all, we got to think about, does procurement and contract administration services constitute engineering? And so we could say no, because non-engineers perform these duties. Hold on just a sec, Paul, then I'll ask the other question. On the other hand, if we say, well, but is the level of expertise needed to perform these non-design services as high as the level of technical expertise required to perform design services? And I would suggest you could answer it saying yes, because you will be the only engineer on site. You are integrating that system. Now, it's being shipped and warranted by a manufacturer, in this case from Germany, but you are the only engineer on site. You know that client is counting on you making sure that project ends up safety and healthy wise. And the contractor may not be looking at that too. I'm not saying they're not ethical, but so I think this is a tough one. Let me just finish a little more, Paul, and then we'll go. That question is, for the same question, as you qualified, does rule practice 1B, the whole safety, health, and welfare, and shall approve only those engineering documents? Now, that brings up the question, is an engineering document plans and specs that you stamp, calculations, or is it, change orders, RFIs, that sort of thing? So that's something to think about. And the last one that I want to minute out is just to think about, does bidding out a project constitute approving, right? Maybe it's not. Or the question, though, is, if you can't do a formal review of a third party, right, and to be able to do that calculations, you're on site, you're the engineer on this project for the rest of this project life cycle, maybe you should not take it. So I think that's part of the question at all. And then the last thing to end is, why did the client ask you to do this, maybe they were totally not thinking about it, but what happens if did you do anything deceptive and in your literature didn't really give the boundary conditions for the work you can do, and you were somehow deceptive and suggested that you can do anything for them, or maybe even your sales engineer or the head of the company implied they could do that. So you can see there's a whole bunch of different parts of the code to apply to this. I do happen to think it's mostly no, because I think it's outside the area of competence. So Paul, any questions or chats to talk about?
Just a few yeses and nos
Okay.
to some of your questions. So
Okay.
appreciate everyone that has commented in real time.
Yep. Okay. So once again, kind of ambiguous, right? You can, people use the word cherry pick, but hopefully by the end, you would settle on the ones that you think are most relevant. And of course, I did still a hypothetical situation, and you might say it really depends. And I totally agree with that. And in the end, it's your gut, but that's jumping to the end of the presentation. Okay. How about this one? Responding to inaccurate project bid documents. So you're walking on a site walk with potential bidders before the bids come in. And it's very clear as you do this site walk, it's not reflected on the plans at all. And so they're asking you, like, what about this? What do I do with that? Do I put that in my bid? Are you going to send out an addenda? What's going to do? So what can you say to them verbally? And what can you put in writing afterwards, or maybe through email, maybe not a formal addenda? And does it matter, that is what you can say or what you write, does it matter whether your firm's prepared those plans or specs that you're now, walking the site on? So, question, Paul?
Yes. How would you feel if designers were maintained to assist? And this, I think, was at the very tail end of the last slide.
Okay. Retained to assist, you mean? Is that what you said? Maintained to assist?
Maintained to assist. It may have meant retained.
Retained.
Yes,
and so to
retained.
assist it. So to assist the owner, be an owner's rep. And I think that's kind of what I've been talking about. And I would suggest it's the same sort of thing, unless the owner's a savvy owner, it seems to me. So when I was in the Navy, we were a very savvy owner. We didn't need any, we had my own construction representatives. We knew what we were doing. We would have the A&E, architect engineer, out there providing some site services, but we were a savvy owner. And I think so it goes back to this idea of what's the strength of your assistants? Are you the only engineer on site? Are you the only people with special powers that are going to look at how that chemical engineering plant is going together? Maybe, the gaskets came in the wrong ones. Is that a problem or not? Can you let it get away? Can you do it, either change order or a deviation from the spec? So, I think it really does depend on how much your strength of assistance is my answer to that. So going back to this, I will say, right, with this idea of what can you say to it? And I would suggest to you that look at the preamble. As members of the profession, engineers are expected to exhibit the highest standards of honesty and integrity. So you better not sit there and blatantly lie. That seems to be a problem. Silence is not a lie. Getting back to you is not a lie. But so I think preamble is helpful. How about this one? Rules of practice, 3A. The canon is engineers shall issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. You might say, well, is a job site with 6 potential bidders, is that a public statement? Anything you might say? That's a good question. I can tell you right now, I don't like the use of the word public in any of the codes of ethics. And for those of me talk about designing for safety, you know why I go there. So that's a question. But if you think about shall be objective and truthful in professional reports, statements, right? So it's a statement is what you use on the job site. Engineers B may express publicly technical opinions that are founded upon knowledge of the facts and competence in the subject matter. So if you're going to say something, probably be honest, or probably best not to say anything at all. And we know how that works. We issue it through bid addenda. And when somebody writes you or calls you and says, I got to know because it's going to double my bid if this is the case, you say, I'll issue you a bid addenda, and then you submit the bid as you see it. So we're getting into custom and practice and contractual law for underlying that solicitation. But from a codes of ethics, I think, it's giving you some ideas for best not to be blatantly lying there. And I asked about, what about if you did your own firm? And I think, okay, here's professional obligation 3A, shall avoid the use of statements containing a material misrepresentation fact or omitting a material fact. That's hard, again, going back to those negotiations or something on the site. if somebody says, do you think that exit that's open today is going to allow construction flow all throughout the project? And you're like, you better not answer that, and you better not say, oh, of course not, because that would maybe be dishonest. How about this rule of practice 1C? Engineers shall hold paramount the safety and health, that's the first canon, but shall not reveal facts, data, or information without the prior consent of the client or employer except as authorized. So this is your keeping it close to your chest because that's what's the best for your client. And I think that's the answer here, right? We go through the bid addenda, we have full honesty, but it's through a formal process that's not going to get us in trouble and not cause us to lie on site. And the last one I said, if it matter, does it matter if your firm produced it? Well, I think 1A does matter. Engineers shall acknowledge their errors and not distort or alter facts. So the idea that, now I'm going to have to redesign these plans and the client is not going to want to pay me for it and I'm going to have to eat it and my budget is already busted. The answer is, come on, you got to fess up. If your firm made that mistake, you got to fix it at your costs, I think, unless there was some other situation. So, Paul, I didn't ask for a question, but if you have, jump right back on because I just finished that question.
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, all right. Are there limitations? We've got just a couple others to go through, and I think we're doing well on time and give you a chance to ask some questions or disagree with what I'm saying through the chats. How much can we help our client achieve their project goals? So here's hired by a client, perform construction services. The winning bidder says, I got the job. I'm glad I got the job. I'm not going to make much money, though, unless I get this great value engineering proposal, because that other design firm, they didn't know what they're doing. I got a great way. It'll meet codes. You're going to be happy with it. But I still need new stamps, right, and new analysis to prove that my value engineering proposal makes sense. This is what I dealt with my very first job when I was a contracting officer in the Navy in Mare Island Shipyard in California. And he didn't ask to hire me, but the value engineering, sometimes people come in and it makes or breaks a contractor on that project. So in this case, he or she's smart and says, I'm going to hire you. You're an engineering firm. You got specialized knowledge about this project, or you will soon. You do the calculus. I'm going to pay you money, but that's no problem because you're going to save money. Because remember, a value engineering is split between half to the owner and half to the contractor. And in this case, the A&E, the engineer, you're going to get some money too for your extra services, engineering services you just did. So can you agree to this arrangement? And if anybody got the codes of ethics ahead of time and actually looked at them, like I was hoping you might, or maybe you have them now in front of you, I think you'll quickly say, I know there's something against this, and you're absolutely right. And so if you look at rule of practice 4A and 4B, it does apply, right? So we shall act for faithful agents. We've talked about that a bunch of times today. And we have to disclose all known or potential conflicts of interest, right? I have a conflict of interest. I'm supposed to be helping the client. At the same time, I want to put more billable hours in my crew's, pocket, in my staff's pocket. So that's a conflict of interest. And I'm supposed to be helping the client make a good decision about whether to accept this value engineering proposal. At the same time, I want it to be because the contractor may not pay me as much or be angry at me if they don't. So there is a conflict of interest. And if you go even further, engineers shall not accept compensation, financial or otherwise, from more than one party or services on the same project or for services pertaining to the same project unless the circumstances are fully disclosed and agreed to by all interested parties. In other words, hey, you go to the client and you say, I think this is good. You don't have to let me do it. You can let another firm do it, but I think this is a good value engineering proposal that you should consider. And if the client says, go ahead, work on it, I don't have any problem, then you can do it. You're good. So finally, I think, I think we got one that's less ambiguous, but here's another one, professional obligation. So this one was rule of practice 4. This is professional obligation. So engineers shall not, without consent, promote or arrange for a new employment. That also applies, right? Because I've moved from construction services. Now I've got some design services on the same project. And so that seems to imply you can't do it even with the client's, permission. So that's a little bit different. Question, Paul? Or comments? Anybody say differently?
We've had some great answers. People are answering correctly on many of these things, so I appreciate those coming in. But we do have a quick question. Is it a conflict if a client did not retain your services during construction?
Yeah, that's a great one, and that happens sometimes. And usually if they didn't retain it, it's because you parted ways for a reason, right? Sometimes, as you know, design consulting firms, really aren't into the site services thing. And so they say, no, we'd rather get you somebody else. Sometimes the prices is an issue. The client may be running out of money or whatever after bid opening. So if you didn't part ways in a bad way, then maybe you could consider doing that. But I still think you'd have to disclose based on this one about it's the same project, it's a new arrangement. It didn't say whether you still have a valid contract on that. So I think this one still says you better disclose. And especially, again, if you didn't part the best way with the client, and you probably didn't, if you couldn't reach agreement on the construction services, you don't want to add fuel to the fire. So that's my thought based on that one right there. Thank you for that question. Good stuff. All right, which ethical duty prevails? So again, this is where you could tell I'm going to get into this ambiguous thing. So a developer, totally made this one up, developer friend brought land along an investment, and traffic congestion's happening, and almost always does. And so you're like, that thing needs to be widened. We need to be doing some other things to increase flow, reduce congestion. And you mentioned this to a friend who bought it, and she's like, would you mind writing that letter to the county engineer and just making the case that you, as an informed citizen, a respected professional engineer in the community, knows that this is needed? Should you write that letter? And it would be truthful. It's needed. So let people think about that a little bit. Can you write the letter or not? And I could tell you we're going to find terms within the codes of ethics that suggest both ways. So first of all, you say, hey, I think there'll be societal serving benefits here, right? It makes sense. It's needed. And so we're canon 2. We shall at all times strive to serve the public interest. Sorry, this is professional obligation 2, not canon 2. Engineers are encouraged to participate in civic affairs. Yeah, we're interacting with the county engineer. Career guidance for youth, doesn't think that applies here. And work for the advancement, safety, and health being of the community. Bingo. Write those letters. Point to 2A, you're good to go. I don't know if anybody caught that one or not. On the other hand, does 2D, so same professional obligation 2, still engineers shall at all times strive to public interest, say, hey, look at this. This is about sustainability. If you put your hat on and think outside the box, you might say, no, road widening, that's so blasé. We got to stop and reduce the traffic in the first place. And so we do mass transit, or we do something else that will reduce it. More carpooling, whatever policies we want to do. That's what the ethical thing to do is, rather than spend money to widen it, hurt the environment, do the sustainable thing and reduce the number of cars in the first place. Our rule of practice 3C, again, public statements only in objective matter. And it says right here, shall issue no statements, criticisms, or arguments, and I would suggest the letter is a statement on technical matters, because you could be called before the zoning board or something to be based on your letter, that are inspired or paid for by interested parties. You're not getting paid, but it's inspired, I think, because it'll help your friend, unless they have prefaced their comments by explicitly identifying the interested parties on whose behalf they are speaking, and by revealing the existence of any interest the engineer may have in the matter. So in this case, it's not a financial interest, unless, of course, you're also thinking the clients may have hinted, or that if you treat that friend well, she's probably going to hire you to do the site civil or whatever engineering design on her land once she moves forward. So you can see there is some conflicts of interest. So I think the answer is you probably better not write the letter, or if you do, you reveal your conflict of interest. You disclose according to rule of practice. So the other thing you might do is you might say, yeah, what about this professional obligation, right? And that is that the professional obligation is, I know small print, engineers shall be guided in their relations by the highest standards of honesty and integrity. You're not being fully honest. You're not demonstrating pure integrity. But the funny thing is, when you look under professional obligation 1, that heading sounds so good, but there's nothing there that really helps us. So the point here is you got to always do the deep dive. Don't just grab the canon or the number 1 part, top level of a professional obligation or rule of practice, which is the canon. Do a deep dive and make sure it's supported underneath. Sometimes it's not, and maybe you still want to go with the high level, but make sure that you are at least looking at to see what it covers. So it's about almost 10 of. We hit a whole bunch of scenarios. I know it was fast, and I know for some of you, you might be frustrated as heck because all this red font and stuff was popping up in front of you, and you didn't get a chance to tell me what about this, what about that, and I apologize for that. But at least now we have some chance to have some feedback. So let me close by saying this, again, reminding how I started. Codes of ethics help us to balance individual and employer self-interest with what's needed for society. Remember, we have been given special powers. We have special responsibilities for society. And I think we always need to be reminded about that. And so they're frameworks, and you got to do the deep dive, but be inspired by that preamble, be inspired by those canons. And don't always look for the smallest thing that lets you get away with it. And I apologize if I seem like, I found something that excuses my bad behavior. Keep at the high level. And so recognizing that particularly our work is messy, right? And especially this bidding and negotiation. And, when you're buying a car, you have no special powers. So that doesn't really apply there. But when you're doing anything to do with built environment or other aspects, maybe even your iPhone, then you do have special powers, special responsibilities. And so the codes of ethics, I want to encourage you to do it. Ultimately, we want to think about this. The professional obligations, number one, I think, shall be guided in all their relations by the highest standards of honesty, integrity. Guided in all their relations by the highest standards of honesty, integrity. That might imply to you say, hey, Mike, that applies to car dealers. Okay, but it did talk earlier about their services as an engineer. So you decide the boundary conditions for this. I hope this has been helpful, that you, again, not too frustrating because we went through it real quick, got you thinking, and I'm looking forward to somebody sending me an email with a bunch of other hypothetical things. Maybe we can get an article out of this or take it on the road, NSPE or something, and talk about this more. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, whether you're a rocket engineer or not, just the Toledo area. You're an important part of the community, so thank you for joining today. And I've got now about 9 minutes to answer questions, and we can go a little bit longer if we need to. But if you stick on the phone for another 8 minutes, Paul will check you off. Boom, he did the hour, and you'll get your CPD. Okay, thank you so much. Paul, what do we see? What do we hear?
I'm waiting for a few questions to come in. We did have a question that came in with their registration earlier, and it was a question with regard to bidding. What was your recommendation, or how would the different ethics apply when you have a bid that comes in and then the contractor, you accept it because it's the lowest bid, and then the contractor comes back and says, oops, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're not the lowest bid anymore. What would
Right.
your recommendations be regarding that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you told me that had come ahead of time. And it shows you the issues, the balance between codes of ethics, laws in the nation or the state or even in the city regarding contractual laws or things like that. And then there is custom and practice, which is, again, a little murky. But then each contract, unless we're doing it ourselves, but if you're part of a big project, then you are issuing that under a certain degree of law. So for me, when I was an officer in the Navy, I was doing it under federal acquisition regulation, further DFAR, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, and in fact, NAVFAC had our own contracting procedures. So when we issued a bid, we would put all that language in there. It was covered by the general conditions that govern that process of receiving those bids. And so I think that's the answer here, is you've got to go ethics, you've got to be overwhelmed by, a better word, by the contract law that applies and the solicitation process that applies, rather than code of ethics or that. So does that answer? Hopefully that answers the question if anybody asked it and didn't quite do it for them. But that's how I look at, I think most of it, there's almost always that kind of thing. Now, I bid out a lot of my work around my house, building a deck or something like that. I'm not issuing. There's no solicitation guidelines. So that's where I guess ethics come into play. But where there is a solicitation contractual body that applies, or a set of general conditions that have been issued publicly, I think you got to go with those.
We have another question that has come in, and it is, what can we do as a third-party engineer if the owner tells you who to select in the bid process, even if that company is not the low bidder?
So that's a good question. First of all, you're to be a faithful agent, right, to that client, it seems to me. And if he or she has reasons for doing that, then that's okay. But let's go back to our fundamental canons and our rules of practice. By that person, do you have a sense that they're going to jeopardize or cut corners that might affect safety, health, and welfare? Or do you know, as I mentioned earlier, they're trouble. They don't do their submittals on time. Their progress payments are always inflated. They front-end load, the schedule of prices. They do all those things. And then you have a duty to, again, say, hey, I don't think this contract's going to be successful. But other than that, it seems to me you don't have, it's up to the client. And so there's no reason not to do that. Now you could say, but I'm protecting my employer. This project is going to go south, and I know the client's going to end up blaming my firm. And that's a tougher one, because now you should be a faithful agent to your firm too. But I think, remember at the very beginning, if there's a paramount, hold safety and health, and if they feel like your judgment is overruled, you put it in writing. And I think that's probably a safe thing to do here, just so the client has it very clear why that's the case. But ultimately, it seems to me it's the client, unless there's federal discrimination laws that would come into play.
Thank you for that. We've had another question come in. As a civil engineer that does a lot of water and wastewater work, I work with electrical, mechanical, and structural sub-consultants frequently, since I'm not qualified in those. I would think we could do a project as described if we had a qualified sub-consultant. In some of these water projects, the electrical engineering is the most critical aspect, not the civil work. So the question is, I would like to think we could do a project as described if we had a qualified sub-consultant.
And I agree with that. So you've got experience coordinating with that sub-consultant who's got specialized expertise that you don't have. But you, as a project integrator, have ability to do that. It's not going to, you feel comfortable being involved with that project and be able to not have any health, safety, and welfare issues on it. And your client will be represented well. So I agree with that. So what's the difference between my, I think, second scenario or third scenario is, remember, I didn't have that consultant, that expertise on site or involved in the project. So I said, you shouldn't take this on. Now, if it turns out that the German systems engineer sent a field engineer and he or she were on site during most of that construction, well, that's maybe different. Now your team includes the expertise you need. And so that's why I'd say it's different. So I think that person, I agree with you. You're okay there. Just make sure you have the expertise on the project. And I'm pretty sure it's NSPE. I know it's definitely ASCE. It says specifically, you don't have to stamp everything, but you better feel good about you're a responsible charge for it. And you better feel good about the processes that led to them stamping their documents. And you're not supposed to stamp documents that you have no idea how they prepared. And I think that's in the NSPE code as well. So as long as you got that subcontractor or subcontractor expertise and they're doing the calculations and stamping, I think you're in good shape.
Another quick question. If the bid document specifies something that may not meet local zoning requirements, does the bidder have an obligation to identify that potential problem to the owner in his bid?
So I was distracted by the comment. If a plans, sorry, start it over one more time.
Sure. If the bid document specifies something that may not meet local zoning requirements, does the bidder have an obligation to identify that potential problem to the owner in his bid?
Yeah, so here's where I go there. So first of all, is that bidder an engineer or not? So let's say the engineer is not an engineer, or the bidder thinks, I'm an engineer, but this doesn't apply to me. I'm not doing design. That's his or her decision. But if you look, as you know, the general conditions, whether it's the EJCDC, which is ASC and AGC and others use, AIA has their own. If you look in those general conditions, they actually specifically address that, whether they're required to do it. So I would suggest to you, you can apply the code of ethics, but again, I think it's more dominated by the contractual. And you could say, well, Mike, isn't that the low bar? Okay, fair enough. If you, you could say that's the case. On the other hand, you just got to stop and think, is your client or your employer somehow less helped by you, by revealing something? So I guess the general purpose is, if you're an engineer, you should probably do it and require a bid addenda. And you said zoning, but of course, building codes is probably just as much a play rather than zoning codes. But anyway, I think it depends if they're an engineer or not. I'd still like to think, if I was a bidder, that I would do that sort of thing. On the other hand, if you do that all the time, you may not get the job, right? So you're going to bid the job. I hate to say this happens, knowing you're going to do a change order. Oh, I didn't realize it didn't meet code. Well, let's now talk about that change order, and you're going to put more profit margin in your change order than you did in your initial bid. So I'm afraid that's the way the game is played. If anybody disagrees with that, let me know. But I would say that's part of the custom and practice within the field.
Thank you. We have a couple more quick questions if we have a minute or two here. The continuation of the same firm from design to construction is common, but it is considered customs and standards. But is it considered customs and standards? Do you see an ethics matter in making this call?
So I have to ask for the clarification of it. Was this a design build contract, or was this a designer who had a contract for design and then had also construction services? And I think in both cases, there's no violation. I do think it's happening more and more. And in fact, we're doing a whole bunch of things, as people know. Integrated project delivery, IPD, integrated project delivery. If you are not familiar with that, you really should get familiar with it, because clients, particularly private clients, but are increasingly going to be doing it. It involves target value design. It involves getting people together during the design, all the field personnel, the major contractors, and coming up with that design and getting that constructability input to make it work. And you might say, wait a minute, what about the checks and balances? The client is counting on us to be the professional engineer who's always keeping oversight of this contractor who might try and cut corners. And it's all changing, and it's changing for the benefit of the client. It's risky, and it's innovation you have to manage, but IPD is going to happen more. Just like design build, came into play in a big way more 20 years and now, 10 years and 5 years. So we're changing now. There's also design assist, as you know, that's part of it. So I'm glad our profession is changing and needs to, but you need to be careful how you manage that change. And you're right, look at codes of ethics. Right now, I'm not aware of any codes of ethics that talk about integrated project delivery or design build. So that's a good point. We probably should have that in there.
Yeah, the clarification was the latter, design, bid, build.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, design, bid, build, and they were doing construction services. Yeah. I don't.
So listen, we have one final question here. And so in this case, you're working for a contractor. In the course of reviewing the plans to prepare the bid, you find an omission that will allow your firm to get the bid, but will come in with a sizable change order after winning the bid. Do you have responsibility to notify the designer?
So that's a really good question. I think I kind of addressed that a little bit. And that there are people who are going to play the game and not bidders who will do that, not notify the designer. They'll intentionally underbid, knowing they can make their margins, their needed margins, through the change order. To me, that is less honest. The integrity is questionable. And so I guess it all depends. Again, as an engineer, what's your identity? Do these code of ethics apply to you even though you're not doing engineering? And it's the idea of are you comfortable not being fully honest during any negotiation? I think it's same sort of thing. So I'm gonna punt on this one and suggest it's really up to the person for their identity whether they think the codes of ethics does. But it says very clearly you're supposed to be an engineer. You're supposed to have faithful agent even for the client or your customer, right? So if you're a general contractor, you're supposed to be ethical and forthright with that customer. And that doesn't sound like if you hide stuff, you're not being ethical to the fellow engineer or to the owner. But I still think it happens a lot, putting it that way.
Thank you for that answer. So we're out of questions. We did have a comment come in that I think is probably perfect to end on. And someone shared an experience where they recalled negotiating a large change order with the non-engineering client representative. They said the night before the negotiation, that client rep asked them what their bottom line was. The next day, their bottom line became the starting point for further negotiation. I wish I had known better. I wish I had been better prepared to point out his negotiating in bad faith tactics. So I think that's probably appropriate to end on. I think that's how we all feel after this hour, that we all feel a little bit better. Maybe wish we had known some of this stuff in our prior career at some point, but it's probably appropriate.
Very good. Well, thank you all for joining us. I hope you thought it was worth your time. Like I say, you're going to get your certificate. No test involved or anything. I'm going to go back through the chats. Paul will give it to me, or if I can't download it myself. And I might be following up some with you. I know my days are busy tomorrow, but maybe we'll do that in the future. So thank you again. go Rockets, right? If you're not a Rocket fan, I guess my plea is, folks, we got to come together as a nation here. As engineers, we should be model citizens. So let's do that and move forward in the appropriate manner. If I can say that, I have big belief in this country, and I look forward to moving on and having engineers helping our country move on in the right way. So thank you very much. Happy holidays to you. And that's it. Go Rockets.
Thank you, Dean Toole. As we close, I would like to, of course, thank our speaker and presenter today, Dean Toole. If you know anything about being a dean at a higher ed institution during a pandemic, the challenges have really been endless, but Dean Toole, much like many of the deans at the University of Toledo, has really been putting on a masterclass on how to handle it. So we appreciate Dean Toole for his leadership in the College of Engineering, but also we appreciate him finding time in his busy schedule to be with us today and provide not only this information, but also his personal experience in the application of ethics. A few quick reminders before we leave here today. Dean Toole will be hosting a town hall on December 8th at 12 noon. This town hall will feature this year's Distinguished Alumni Award winner for the College of Engineering, Robin Whitney. She is the Chief Strategic Planning, Business Development, and Real Estate Officer for ProMedica Health System. If you enjoyed this program and would like to offer a thank you gift, more information on that will be coming in the email, which will have your certificate. Another way to support programs such as this is to become a member of the Alumni Association, the University of Toledo Alumni Association. The Alumni Association recently added a national benefits program that provides discounts on everything from food, services, restaurants, and after the pandemic, probably travel. And many people who have used these discounts have said they've been able to more than pay for their membership with the discounts they've received. So if you're interested, more information on that is at toledoalumni.org, as well as the post-event email as well. I know we've had some questions about the certificates. When will they get them? The plan is to email those out at the email that you registered under in the next few business days. I'm hoping you'll have those in hand before Thanksgiving. If for some reason those get held up, I'll send out an email and let everyone know. Once again, if you'd like to view this presentation again, I know we went fast, I know we went quickly. It's going to be available in the videos on demand section of toledoalumni.org. I'll also include that link in the email that I send after this presentation with your certificate. Once again, thank you for being here today. We appreciate all of you that tuned in and asked questions and participated. We hope you have a great evening, and of course, go Rockets.